Today is Sunday, August 18th, 2024, and this is Alan Zundel presenting Political Dharma once again. Today I'm going to be looking at a news article published by the Washington Post. Let me put this up on the screen while I tell you about it. This was published last Wednesday, August 14th, and you see the headline there. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tried to meet with Kamala Harris to discuss cabinet job. Now, the little blurb underneath says the Harris campaign's rebuffed an offer of an endorsement. Well, Kennedy has also had conversations with Donald Trump about a role in his administration. Now, you may remember that about a month ago, on July 22nd, the Washington Post published another article, and this one was about how RFK Jr. sought a job in a Trump White House as he weighed endorsing Trump, and that kicked up a big media storm. It was republished on plenty of different media sites, just like this current article is being spread all over the place. And I did talk in 3 different segments about that supposed Trump meeting, or the actual Trump meeting, what supposedly happened there in my first video. That was around the same time that the discussions between Kennedy and Trump were first reported. I talked about problems with interpreting the video that was released by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s son, showing him listening to Donald Trump talk on a cell phone, and how to interpret that with some kind of logical sense. And then I had further thoughts on it in a second video that I dedicated entirely to this particular story, and using additional information, including Kennedy's denial that he offered to endorse Trump, and then a further video just a couple of weeks ago, which is pretty short, in which I'm going to use a segment of later in this program, because I think it bears upon this current story. So the Washington Post is asserting that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Offered to endorse Harris in return for a cabinet position. Now, most folks will look at a story like this, which would reflect badly on Kennedy, showing him as being lying to his supporters, who he's been telling he's in it to the end. He's out to win the presidency, and he says explicitly he's not offering to endorse Trump or endorse Harris. So the alternatives seem to be either trusting Kennedy or trusting the media. And people will take positions based on how they lean in that way. But I think there is a better way to look at this, a little more analytically, which is to ask about each party's motivations and outlook. What do we know about how they're motivated, and what can we best speculate about those motivations? And also, what can we say about how they probably see the world based on what we know about the positions that they're in and the environment that they're operating within? So let's take a closer look at that story and highlight some things and ask if there's a more complicated story here beyond whether Kennedy is lying or the media is making this up. So go to the Washington Post story now, and we'll look at the beginning of that story. This is the first paragraph, and by the way, it was the same authors for both stories who wrote these articles for the Washington Post. That first paragraph, as you can see in your video, if you're watching in video form, independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. sought a meeting last week with Democratic nominee Kamala Harris to discuss the possibility of serving in her administration, perhaps as a cabinet secretary if he throws his support behind her campaign and she wins, according to Kennedy campaign officials. Now, I've highlighted that to show what the sources for this story are. Kennedy campaign officials. What does that mean exactly? Anyone who works in a campaign has some official title. Even if they're a volunteer, they could be petition signature gatherer or something like that. But you usually assume that this is somebody higher up in a decision-making position, but not necessarily the people that are closest to Kennedy. A campaign official could be the leader of a state party get out the vote campaign, or get signatures to get on the ballot campaign, who is not necessarily well informed of all the discussions going on in the central office in the campaign decisions that are being made. So they may be officials who know what they're talking about, or they may be using hearsay to describe situations they weren't directly involved in. Now, the second paragraph goes on to say that Harris and her advisors have not responded with an offer to meet with or shown interest in the proposal, say people familiar with the conversations. So here the source is people familiar with the conversations. Now, what does that mean? Familiar is derived from the word family, so that means you'd be very close to the situation. Well, who was familiar with the conversation other than the people actually having the conversations or having conversations with Kennedy or Harris? And they don't really say who they are. Are they the same people as the Kennedy campaign officials, or are they different people? Now, to be familiar with a conversation may mean that you just heard somebody else talk about it, and you're passing along information that may or may not be reliable. Third paragraph, the Kennedy outreach made through intermediaries. So from this, they're saying Kennedy didn't do it directly, somebody else did. And we don't know if those intermediaries were either campaign officials or the people that are talking to the Washington Post and saying they're familiar with the conversations. But it follows a meeting in Milwaukee last month, and this goes on to talk about the Trump story that they covered earlier. So let's look further at that story. This is the next paragraph. The independent candidate and namesake of the most famous American political dynasty is exploring multiple options for the future of his presidential effort, which has seen a decline in national polling since President Joe Biden dropped out of the race. So far, so good. You know, there's nothing controversial there. He may be thinking of different options for the future of his effort. That may be different campaign strategies. That may mean what to do beyond the presidency if he succeeds or fails. So, yeah, he would explore those options. And his campaign has seen a decline in national polling since Joe Biden dropped out of the race, more accurately since Kamala Harris was promoted into the leading candidate. So, yeah, that's true as well. No problem with that. His campaign has produced polling which it has tried to share with Democrats, that it claims shows both Harris and Trump would get a boost in their public support across 31 states if either candidate announced publicly that Kennedy would have a cabinet role in their administration. So here again, they're talking about Kennedy having a cabinet role, which does not necessarily imply that Kennedy is offering an endorsement in return for that. I want you to keep that in mind. I'm not just being picky. There is a reason that I'm flagging that particular element to this story. And then finally, going on further, at the moment, Kennedy says he is continuing to campaign with the expectation that he will defeat both Trump and Harris. True, he says he is doing that. They're casting doubt on it simply by saying he says and following up on all this other stuff about how he is actually considering other options and talking to their campaigns about endorsing them. He's making regular interview appearances, releasing an American strong plan for bipartisan governance. Now, note that they're aware of that as well, and planning upcoming rallies in states, blah, blah, blah. He has also left open the possibility of bowing out of the race if he finds another way to bring about the change he seeks in the country. His advisors say, who are these advisors? Are they people that are simply offering unsolicited advice? Are they people that Kennedy politely listens to because they're prominent figures or good friends, but he doesn't necessarily heed their advice? How do they know what's going on? Do they have it directly from Kennedy, or are they inferring it from other sources of information? So we don't know who these advisors are, what kind of position they have in relationship to Kennedy, or how accurate their information is, but they're saying he has left open the possibility of bowing out of the race. That part I doubt, but he could be looking for other ways to bring about change. So why not? If he can find a better way than running for president and he can explain that adequately, the switch off to his supporters, why not explore the possibility? But I think that would be a pretty dicey proposition that he could get away with doing something like that. Next, we have a direct quote from Kennedy. From the beginning of this campaign, we were saying people should be talking to each other. Kennedy said Wednesday in an interview, that is the only way of unifying the country. So note two things. Kennedy says people should talk to each other, and I presume this includes candidates because he did acknowledge talking to Donald Trump. And he says that is the only way of unifying the country. So here he is revealing what he says is his motive, unifying the country. Kennedy said he hopes Harris reconsiders his offer of a meeting. I think it's a strategic mistake for them. That's my perspective, Kennedy said. I think they ought to be looking at every opportunity. I think this is going to be a very close race. So what is Kennedy talking about there? What is the strategic mistake, and what opportunity is it that they should be looking at? The implication of the article is that the opportunity is to get Kennedy's endorsement in return for a cabinet position, and the strategic mistake is in refusing to talk to him. Then the article goes on. Let's just give you one more paragraph or so, and not the whole thing. Next one, after the initial publication of this story late Wednesday, Kennedy and his campaign confirmed the outreach to Harris and to other news organizations. Well, I followed the link to other news organizations, and it was CNN talking again to who they called a campaign official. I'm going by memory. I read this last night, but that was the source, and that's who they attributed it to. On Thursday morning, however, as though this contradicts it, he dismissed the idea of endorsing Harris in a social media post. So is it possible Kennedy is reaching out to Harris, but not endorsing her or offering to endorse her? Now this, if you listen to my take on the Donald Trump discussions, that would be exactly what I would expect, that he wants to talk to her about unifying the country, but he's not offering an endorsement. There's nothing contradictory about that, although this article is tying them together as necessary components of the same deal. Quote, VP Harris's Democratic Party would be unrecognizable to my father and uncle, and I cannot reconcile it with my values, he wrote, referring to former President John F. Kennedy and former New York Senator Robert F. Kennedy. I have no plans to endorse Kamala Harris for president. I do have a plan to defeat her. So Kennedy is outright there saying he has no plans to endorse her. That's his statement. That's the same kind of statement he made about Trump, and he is sticking with it. So a direct contradiction between what the Washington Post is claiming and what Kennedy is saying about himself. The article goes on then to go into things that I'm not going to reproduce for you here. It essentially is adding that there were ongoing discussions with Trump after the initial conversations, that the Kennedy campaign did try to contact Democrats repeatedly about the idea of replacing Biden, whom they saw as losing to Trump in the election according to the polls, and replacing Biden with RFK, because he initially wanted to run as a Democrat, and I think he would be comfortable in the leadership of that party, but he could have well been doing that, continually offering himself. Why not, if there's any slight possibility that they would accept him and think he is a stronger candidate than Biden? Because remember, leading up to Harris, nobody thought Harris was going to be a very strong candidate either, and she's not really crushing Trump at the polls so far, although the polls, meaning the public opinion polls, not the polls, the voting polls, but nobody thought she would do even as well as she is now. So it would make sense for Kennedy to say, look, Biden's not doing well. You got me here. My family has longtime ties to the Democrats. Why not replace him with me? It seems unlikely the Democrats would do that, to me anyway. And I don't know how much Kennedy thought they would, but why not try, right? It would make the path easier for him and also make the help salvage the Democratic Party. And they also talk about how the Democrats refused to talk to Kennedy. All right, so all that's neither here nor there to the essential claims of the article. All right, so what do I think about this article and how to think about it? So the Washington Post and Kennedy agreed that he made overtures to the Harris campaign and also has been in discussions with the Trump campaign. He also says in both cases, he confirms that his intention was to talk about unifying the nation, that is, getting beyond partisan divides and finding a way for people to talk to each other across these divisions. So that's facts that we know. He's confirmed that there's outreach, he's confirmed that there's been discussions, and he's confirmed that this could include position for Kennedy within one of their administrations. Now, does that mean he is offering to endorse them? He repeatedly denies that that's what he offered. So what's really going on? Is he lying about the offer and endorsement, or did the Washington Post get it wrong? It could be that both of them are operating according to their best understanding of the situation and their real intentions. Now, what are those real intentions, and what is their understanding of the situation? Reporters. Let's think about the reporters' career incentives. Now, given, number one, they want their articles to be read because that's not only why they get into the game, they want people to read what they have to write. They want to establish themselves as a journalist, or at least an author, or get some kind of leg up into this world of politics. So their incentive is to get stories that get read, right? And what gets read? Generally, readers like to read backroom politicking. That is, they like to learn about what's going on behind closed doors. So a story that seems to offer information about what a campaign is really doing as opposed to what it says it's doing would be enticing to them. And it also finds that readers like stories about the dirty laundry of anybody in public life. That is, their hypocrisies and their hidden behaviors and stuff like that. So a story in which a political figure like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is backroom maneuvering to try to gain something for himself, despite what he's telling his supporters, would be something that any reporter would be interested in covering. Now, the other incentive that they have, though, and this applies mostly to reporters in what is usually called mainstream media or reputable publications. It's not editorializing. They have professional norms as reporters. The other incentive is that they need to get their facts straight. Now, facts are one thing, interpretation is another. The facts would be they were told certain things by certain sources. Their interpretation would be whether or not to believe those sources and how to put the pieces of information together that they're getting from those sources, right? So they're getting information from what they call Kennedy campaign officials, Kennedy advisors, and people familiar with the conversation. So this is more than one person. We don't know how many. We don't know if these are all the same people or different people, but they've got sources and they are relying on what they tell them. And they also, tell us what Kennedy has to say about this. Now, those are the facts, but what is the interpretation of the facts? How do they fill in the blanks? How do they decide what's really going on? So they have those two career incentives, one, to get stories that get read, and two, to get the facts straight because their reputation relies upon this, and the reputation of their newspaper or their publisher depends upon people trusting it. And if they just get their facts plain out wrong, or make up stuff, they're not going to have a very good career at most media sources. But they do have a particular outlook that is shaped by their profession. One of the things that is common wisdom among reporters who cover politics is that politicians routinely are ambitious people who are always looking for the next step up the ladder, that they spin information to their benefit, and that they, now I don't want to shock you, but they often lie. Reporters, this is the common wisdom among reporters, and it's one that's repeatedly confirmed in their experience dealing continually with politicians and similar public figures, that they are ambitious, they spin things, and they lie. So this is the prism through which they tend to see someone like Kennedy, that he's probably ambitious, that he's probably spinning things, and that he's probably lying about important things that might be embarrassing. Okay, so he's either lying about them or he's trying to spin them to his advantage as an ambitious figure. Another thing that they know as common wisdom is that independent candidates for high public office don't win, right? Independent candidates, third-party candidates, anybody that a major party candidate has a tough time winning in our electoral system. So the common wisdom is that these people aren't going to win, which means that, number one, it's not important to talk about what they would do or what they say they would do if they reach office. Excuse me, that was my phone. It's not important to them to say what they would do or what they plan to do if they reach office, because they're not going to reach office. So they're not going to report on that, and they don't in the case of Kennedy. They don't talk very much at all about his plans if he does become president. And they also think that people who get into politics and run as an independent or third-party candidate are either delusional, and thus they could put Kennedy in that box and say, well, he's just a weird person who has weird ideas. Let's see, how can we confirm that? Well, has outside the box thinking about the assassinations of his father and his uncle. He has outside the box thinking about vaccines and autism, and he puts his hands in the mouth of a dead bear, and all these things that fit the narrative in which somebody running for high office as an independent really is kind of delusional and kind of strange, or to use the term of the day, weird. So they're going to put him within that category. Or these people who run for office know they're not going to win and they're after something else. So they could also put him in that box, and that's what they seem to be doing in this story, is putting him in the box of somebody who's really ambitious to try to move forward his agenda, even if it means lying to the public or betraying his supporters. That's the kind of box they're putting him in, and those are things that they have as common wisdom, and it's, I don't know if it's confirmed in reality, but I would say it's outside them to think of this in any other terms, and I'm going to offer you an option which I think is realistic. Now let's think about the sources. What are their possible motivations? Now, these may be different people in different positions with different sources with different pieces of information to give us. And some of them are saying things that Kennedy will confirm, that he's been in talks, he's outreach to the Harris campaign, he's been in talks with Trump, he's discussed possible cabinet position, especially with Trump, he's confirmed that. I don't think he's denied that there was those kind of discussions with Harris. The one thing he has denied is that he is offering to endorse either of them in return and drop out of the race in return for a position in their cabinet. That's the one thing he has denied. So if one of those sources is giving that particular piece of information, but lots of other sources are confirming the rest of it, the reporter is probably going to say, well, let's see how this piece of information fits in with my expectations. Okay, he is in talks, he is talking about a cabinet position, and he is denying that he offers to endorse, but what else would he trying to be achieving here? Either he's delusional, and I don't think he is. Maybe he's ambitious, maybe he's calculating, and so there's probably truth in the idea that we get from these one or two or who knows how many sources saying that he was offering to endorse them. It may have been only one person saying this, and it may have been somebody who does not really have insider information. It may be somebody who's already been influenced on the earlier Trump story in which Trump apparently floated the idea of an endorsement, so there was discussions about endorsement. They may have been influenced by that to expect, okay, I'm going to put this together the same way the reporters do. Here I know Kennedy's in talks. They're reaching out to the Harris administration. They're trying to talk about a cabinet position. Probably same things going on that I heard about going on with Trump that he's offering to endorse. So we don't know how many sources had this particular piece of information that Kennedy was offering an endorsement to Harris. We don't know who those people were. We don't know how good their information is. And it's fit within a context in which that would seem to make sense if you look at Kennedy through a certain prism or a certain way of looking at things. Now, let's look at Kennedy himself and ask what kind of a person he is. So we have at least two options here. Either he's naive and he just doesn't understand what he's doing, that he really expects that the Democrats or the Republicans are going to accept this offer and that his supporters are just going to continue to believe in him even though he's saying he's not offering an endorsement, but he actually was, and he's steps out of the race even though he says he wants to win. So he would be betraying all these people, and he thinks he can get away with it. That would be very naive or very calculating. Or the thing that reporters offer about him is that he is delusional. He's just weird. He just but anyone who listens to Kennedy, I think, would say that he makes sense in a lot of areas. He may be wrong about some things. All of us are wrong in some areas. I can't even count the number of times in my life I decided I was wrong about something I thought earlier, and I'm probably wrong about stuff now. I just don't know which stuff it is yet. So we're all wrong about stuff sometimes. But is Kennedy just out and out, not in touch with reality here? I don't think so. I think Kennedy is best categorized neither as naive or as delusional. but as idealistic. And by that I mean something very specific, and I'll apply it to myself as well. I don't mean idealistic as opposed to realistic, because people who make that distinction usually think of themselves as being realist, which means they have a cynical outlook in my eyes. And a cynic is one who thinks that if you try to do something good, if you try to work for higher goals, high ideals, you're going to be disappointed. It's not going to happen. The world doesn't work that way. There's too many evil people, or people are too ignorant, or things are just too hard to change. So they regard that as realism, but it's really a cynical take that nothing that you can do to try to make a difference is going to matter. In the end, an idealist is someone who may see the same picture. Many people might be evil, many people might be ignorant, situations are very hard to change, people's minds are hard to change, et cetera, that it's hard to run as an independent candidate and win. It's all of this stuff you may be very realistic about, but you still think we got to do something to do our best efforts to make a difference for the better in the world. And if I'm giving a set of bad options, I'm going to take the least bad and work as hard as I can to do that unless I can find a better way. So that's what I regard as an idealist. And this, as I said, describes me. I know the world is in many ways stacked against trying to do some good in the world, but I've repeatedly tried to do that within my best understanding of what I could do and how I could do it, even though I don't always expect it's going to work. I got to do something for the sake of my grandchildren, for the sake of other people, and just for the sake of my own sense of who I am and what my life's about. So an idealist, therefore, is somebody who thinks it's worth trying because there is some possibility it might work, and if you don't try, there's no possibility it's going to work, that anything's going to change. If people aren't trying to make things change, they'll change, but not necessarily for the better. So as long as you have the option of doing something to make things better, you should do it despite the odds against it. And those are the kind of people that I think are worth emulating, and that's the way of approaching life I think makes the most sense. But reporters have seen so many people who are idealists fail. They probably are reinforced in the cynical outlook that it's not even worth trying. But we all hope in our hearts of hearts that we come across somebody who's really and truly trying to do that. I'm willing to say that my impression of Kennedy, where I might disagree with him about a lot of his assessment about the possibilities of what he's doing, or how he sees things, whether he accurately interprets information, might differ. I still see him as like me in that sense. He's an idealist. He knows things are rough. He knows things are hard. I mean, for God's sake, his uncle and his father were assassinated while trying to do some good in the world. At least in my best reading of history, that's what they were trying to do at that point in their lives. And he knows this is a dangerous road to take, and it doesn't always result in success. Things can go terribly wrong, even with your best efforts. So that's my take on Kennedy. Now, I want to bring you back to the Trump story, because my take on the Trump story helps explain what I think is happening in this story as well. So when I did that Trump story, the final episode on it was one in which I relied on an article in Mediaite, and you can find that online if you look for Mediaite.com. That is media, M-E-D-I-A, I-T-E, and Google Mediaite RFK, and you'll find it. They had an article about how this Trump and RFK unity deal fell apart. Now, what is the unity deal, and how did it fall apart? Well, I'm going to play a clip from my earlier video in which I summarize what I concluded after my exploration of the Trump RFK story and reading the Mediaite article. So here's that clip. Oh, and before I play, I want you to note that I didn't change anything in this clip, even the mistake I made when I said JFK, but John F. Kennedy, the president, when I meant RFK, the living Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So disregarding that mistake I made, I'm keeping that in. Here's the clip. This article says that the sources with knowledge of the meeting, again, anonymous sources, say that Trump requested a meeting with JFK after the assassination attempt, and what he wanted was an endorsement, but RFK was not interested in doing that, refused from the get-go apparently.
but they did agree to do a joint announcement about the importance of national unity and make this announcement at the Republican convention. So the Trump campaign team asked Kennedy to draft a unity government proposal regarding what they would work on together. And, for example, vaccines, the potential problems with vaccines, and also the issue of government corruption. And they asked what role Kennedy would like to have in a possible future Trump administration. And I guess Kennedy responded with some ideas and said that an appropriate role might be head of Health and Human Services, one of the cabinet level departments in the United States government. So, of course, the big thing with Kennedy has been exploring the sources of the explosion of chronic illnesses in the United States, especially among young people. But soon the Trump campaign went dark. Kennedy was hanging out, waiting to make this joint announcement at the convention, which is again what I speculated, that he stayed there for a few days because they were expecting to do something together on the topic of quote unquote unity. But the Trump campaign for some reason never followed through, and we don't know why that is, but I assume it's because without an endorsement, this looks like it could boost Kennedy, who is, according to the polls at least, seems to be doing more to harm Trump's potential for getting more votes rather than that of Harris, Kamala Harris.
So to summarize that particular take on it, which I still think is the most accurate take, was that it wasn't RFK who offered to endorse Trump in return for a cabinet position. It was Trump who was soliciting RFK for an endorsement, and RFK refused it. He wasn't interested in doing that, but he was interested in doing something with Trump to try to unify the nation. And it was in that context in which Kennedy made some kind of proposal to Trump, which the Trump campaign considered but then rejected. And they had him standing by, that is, they had Kennedy standing by at the Republican convention to make some kind of joint statement with Trump, and it never did actually happen. So Kennedy did not offer to endorse Trump, and he wasn't interested in that, but he was interested in some kind of proposal for unifying the nation across these partisan divides. Now, what could that be? I'm going to play one last clip for you, and this is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. himself speaking in earlier July at the Freedom Fest event in Las Vegas. Here he is talking about his ideas for an American Strong platform, which was briefly mentioned in that most recent Washington Post article. So here it is.
And that's why I look back at Abraham Lincoln, who led our country through the original Civil War, when we were even more divided than we are today. Lincoln did not do a victory dance and exclude his defeated opponents with gleeful cries of elections have consequences. He committed himself instead to what he called a team of rivals, a government representing all Americans, those who seem to have won and those who seem to have lost. He knew that otherwise the Civil War was never, ever going to truly end. My #American Strong platform is a commitment to lead a unity government, 4 years of truly nonpartisan government representing all of our people and not just the victors. In service to this end, I pledge to appoint a cabinet comprising members of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Libertarian Party, and people from the Green Party and other parties, and parties outside the political process. And I pledge to you to convene a cross-partisan advisory committee to propose and select Supreme Court justices. I'm going to carefully examine whether any prosecutions of public and private officials were politically motivated. And I'll pardon or commute the sentences of any people who have been politically prosecuted.
So that's what I think all this outreach on the part of the Kennedy campaign towards the Harris campaign has been about, that Kennedy sees this maybe as an unlikely path to national unification and bridging partisan divides, but the most promising one of a lot of bad options, which is for each leading candidate to offer to include within their cabinet, if they win, representatives from other parties including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. representing presumably all of his supporters, as well as the We the People party that he set up in a few states. That's what I think is going on here, that there's multiple reports that there is actually outreach to the Harris campaign. There is talk about having cabinet positions, but I think it's about this plan. He's saying to the Harris campaign, look, if you do this, we've done it. If you do it, offer to put people of different parties in your cabinet. This will help unify the country. And if we all come out and say something like this, you, me, and Trump, then it will do the country a world of good. This is what I think is going on here. It is consistent with what Kennedy said. It is consistent with most of what the Washington Post is reporting. It just is inconsistent with those who are saying that Kennedy offered an endorsement and not seeing any more evidence than anonymous sources who may or may not be in the know about this or who may be influenced by other information that's not accurate. I'm going to stick with this story till I see something better. That's the most plausible explanation to me. It fits my assessment of the kind of person Kennedy is, and it fits my assessment of how reporters operate, and it fits my assessment of this particular story and what is in it. Thanks for watching. If you want to help support this channel, as always, you can go to politicaldharma.com, make a one-time donation, or you become a Patreon member at patreon.com/politicaldharma and give a recurring donation. That'll help me keep doing this, because if my wife sees some money coming in, she'll say, oh, maybe these videos really are something you should put more time into, and then I can produce more videos and do a better job of it. So thanks a lot for listening, and I appreciate it. And I'll see you again sometime in the next, within a week or so. Anyway, bye.